Namaste and good evening, everyone. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste. Welcome to everybody.
We are happy to be back and to continue our series. Today, part 13 on the same theme with more words and with the text from Mother and Sri Aurobindo. You may post your questions in the chat box or you may send your questions at our email ID integralstudies.in@gmail.com. And we will start with a comment we have from Amelie. Thank you very much for the clarification. It was very helpful. There's a common saying, no pain, no gain, which implies that suffering must be an important part of growth. I was conflicted with this belief, which trains one to think suffering has a purpose. If I summarize, pain, physical or emotional, is to be understood and transformed. It is not something to focus or dwell on.
Yes. It's an important question, and I thought it was an observation actually in the comments, but I treat it also as a question because it opens a certain direction of discussion which is extremely important, and it requires a certain correction which I personally consider critical when one takes up the approach of the integral yoga, which, as you all know, is different from other traditions or religions on this one key point, that the goal is to manifest the divine, to divinize our consciousness, and to divinize life. Just this makes such a huge difference that many other values and priorities which are prevalent almost commonly in all traditions now become negated or even are falsified. And this relationship with pain is one of those things. And so I wanted to take a moment to elaborate on this a little bit. And Amelie observes that it was a conflict of belief to think that suffering has a purpose, and now it's a clearer thing where she says pain is to be understood and transformed. Yes, but not quite. It's in the right direction, but not quite it. The nature of pain one has to understand. Pain itself, what it represents is a limitation and an incapacity to bear whatever comes. So if you look at reality in the way the divine knows itself and experiences reality, it is from a consciousness which is infinite. When you live in an infinite consciousness, any wave, small, big, enormous, gigantic, would still be, well, smaller than you. So the sense of something hitting on you, even an infinity hitting on you who is infinite, is not only bearable but even can be joyous in different ways. Pain is an experience specific to a consciousness which is narrow and limited and bound to its narrowness. So what happens is, when something small meets you, if it is smaller, it can be absorbed by you. It becomes a useful experience, sometimes even a pleasant or a nourishing experience. Not always pleasant in the human context, because again that's the narrowness of our way of relating to things. But even if we broaden ourselves sufficiently, any experience, and this is quite common among human beings, even difficult experiences, one can perceive as a growth opportunity if you're large enough, if you're flexible enough. But if the experience coming is now almost the same size as you or your capacity, it threatens, it disbalances you. If the experience is bigger, then it breaks you. That's when you experience pain. As you approach this point where it begins to disbalance or break you, then you experience pain. But now you can say, if this is big, I make myself still bigger, and the same pain experience, let's say now, is no more pain. So it's not so much about understanding and transforming pain. The pain is always indicative that there is some part in you that is narrow, rigid, inflexible, limited, bound in whatever way. And the point of pain is felt precisely in the part which is unable to be free. If it is an emotional pain, well, it's simply because you're unable to let go of something, some attachment or some memory, it could be, or some sense of wrong, which whatever your moral compass or values have presented to you as unfair, etc. But the moment you free yourself from that entanglement, that limitation, you'll find suddenly that pain vanishes. Which is generally the case. For example, when we are quite young, there are memories of things done to us which are still painful. Once you have outgrown it, you've been through many other kinds of experiences of life, you look back at that something and say, it's not such a big deal anymore. If you brood upon it, build upon it, then you expand its value until it can become overwhelming through your life. So one of the things which I suggest as a way of getting free from such issues, and we are largely right now talking about psychological pain, not physical pain, though the principle applies in the physical consciousness also. In the domain of psychological pain, one of the things which I find helpful and which you could try to use is to think about what would be the value of this. Let's say if you forgot about it completely. Let's say you got a knock on your head and suddenly that memory was knocked out. What would it matter to you anymore? Or when you take birth again in a new body and you will remember nothing of this, what will be the value of this pain? And something which I have said many times before, and it's always worth reminding ourselves. What if right now you could take a new birth in consciousness terms, as thoroughly within you as you can? Obviously, there are parts in you which can do that, other parts which are not willing to let go. But if you can make it this thorough enough, literally from one day to the next, or from last week to the present week, from last year to this year, use occasions of transition such as a moment of awakening, some deep experience, or a birthday, or a New Year day. Use these as a lever to force that transition. Say, from this point on, all that has happened to me in the past is irrelevant. I retain only the basic growth and experience that it has given me, and I start my life afresh. I meet everybody I've known with new eyes, fresh feelings, fresh perspective. If I know somebody has committed treachery, let's say in the more extreme forms, I don't forget that that the person is capable of treachery, but I forget the specifics of treachery done, or I set aside. And you recognize that this person is capable of treachery and I have to be careful. I don't trust blindly. So there is a statement which Pranabda, in the head of the physical education department, used to say in response to people saying, why don't you forgive and forget? He says, I can forgive, but I can't forget. Okay, there's a point to it. But what you can forget, what you should forget is the specifics. The lesson you don't forget. And the lesson specific to this person or this situation, or generally for life, that anybody, even the most trustworthy person, could someday end up in a situation, conflict, sometimes inadvertently, end up betraying your trust, and maybe not intentionally. So, well, what do you do about it? Well, you do what's required. In the domain of business, where things are of a different kind, you play the game of business, which is trust but verify. Trust but protect yourself. Without trust, there's no business. You don't do a deal. But having made a deal, or when you're about to make a deal, you also protect yourself because you understand there are compulsions of all kinds. And so that's why you have this agreements that you sign and things like that. So the idea is you learn from the lessons, you learn from the growth of consciousness, but now you engage from a fresh, new person that you are. And then with that, suddenly you'll find many things change. But coming specifically to the pain, you understand it is always something which overwhelms you, which tends to disrupt your current capacity and harmony. As your capacity grows, the same experience will no more be experienced as pain. But I'm coming to something more profound here. The common saying, there is that no pain, no gain. It comes from this idea that you need to make strong effort You need to suffer in order to get to something which is meaningful. Maybe there's a truth to it, but one should not exaggerate. The pain itself need not be pain. No effort, no gain, yes, but the effort need not be painful. The effort, even though a struggle, can still be a joyous struggle. As, for example, when you climb a mountain. You have the joy of climbing, you have the joy of reaching the peak, but as you're climbing, your muscles may ache, but you don't call this suffering. You have pain, but you don't call it suffering. So understand that distinction again. Pain may come from something that pushes your limits, but suffering is your response to the pain. And that's something you can change along the lines already discussed. So one more angle to this, which is perhaps going to something still deeper, is this association which has been drilled into us, especially from the ascetic, religious or philosophical traditions. In the Christian tradition, for example, this concept of suffering and the guilt is so deeply set that somewhere inside you're programmed from childhood to feel guilty about sin or whatever else it is, and to associate pain with a necessity. So even Christ has to suffer on the cross so that your sins are, so to say, freed. But that's not the case. That need not be at all, and it's a great perversion of a truth. The observation Sri Aurobindo makes is even the cross, which is a sign of the individual and the universal uniting. He says it's been turned into a symbol of suffering. That's not the case actually. It can be a symbol of something very beautiful. But this kind of programming is very deep because it has been drilled into you from childhood. And sometimes to get free from this takes a little time. But my goal in going into this is to make you conscious that if from that layer this idea pops up, then you need consciously to dissolve those associations. Literally think about it this way. Everything in the universe, in the cosmos, is essentially divine, including even the most ugly and perverse things. Essentially is made of divine consciousness or substance. It's only a perversion, a twisting, a warping of what is the truth. And therefore, in principle, every step of your life should be possible to have joy to greater joy to greater joy. Struggle, yes, in the effort. A little bit of pain in the nature of the transition or effort, because there are parts which resist and there are parts which are too rigid and sometimes need to be knocked a bit or broken a bit so that you can be free. But the nature of the journey itself has to be, or can be at least, joy to greater joy. And suffering need not be present. There may be pain, but again, it's a secondary aspect in your growth of joy. So think about this, dwell upon it, and see if you can consciously dissolve some of these formations. We can go to the next question.
Again from Amelie. How do we measure or sense that we are making progress or that the transformation of our nature is taking place? In parentheses, without growing a spiritual ego. Would it be the ability, A, of feeling peace by lengthening the time spent without any thoughts and desires in our mind? Second question, to be more beauty and feel more joy in our daily lives. Third, not to identify with pain. Fourth, have a clear understanding of our nature through out-of-body experience, for example. And E, all or none of the above. Can you tell I work in education?
Yes. So the question is about how do you measure or sense that you're making progress or that the transformation of your nature is taking place. And she has suggested 4 markers, all of them, none of them. But there's also a very interesting suggestion in the parenthetical comment, without growing a spiritual ego. Yes, there is a fear many have that if you feel you're making progress or something is happening in you, and to recognize that would make you egoistic. And I would like to again correct that because I think it's a lot of this comes from the way we have been programmed in our childhood, that when you do something good, you exult, you are enthusiastic, you're proud of having done something. Immediately someone tells you, hey, that's you being egoistic, you will have a spiritual ego or whatever ego, and you're beaten down, so to say. It is the nature of the vital energies particularly to enjoy and to exult in any achievement. And it needs in some form that satisfaction of, yes, this was done, and the joy which comes with it. This need not be egoistic. It can just be a joyous confirmation, acceptance, recognition, and to say that, yes, I've experienced this. At least having said I've experienced, there's nothing wrong. If you say I've realized it, maybe not. You might be premature in your interpretation, but you can say you've experienced this and this was beautiful, recognizing that it's the beginning of so much more. So if you keep this broad approach that every experience you have is the tip of something which will grow into infinite possibilities or into infinite scope, range, intensity, potential, and with infinite variations also possible. If you keep that at the back of your mind, the sense of the larger reality as well as your journey towards something which is infinity and infinite bliss eventually in all infinite variations of infinite bliss. So anything you experience is, yes. And to accept that, to enjoy that, to appreciate, or even to use it as a confirmation for your faith and your conviction that yes, it's possible, it's within your reach, is helpful. The fear that it might become a spiritual ego makes us say, oh no, but I am no good and this is beyond my capacity, it cannot be, I am so small, and all these are perversions. Sri Aurobindo actually describes three kinds of the tamasic, three kinds of egoism, tamasic, rajasic and sattvic. So there is the rajasic egoism where he I think points out that I am so great, I have achieved so much. There's the tamasic egoism which goes the other way, which says, I am no good, I am worthy of nothing, what can the divine do with me, I am nowhere, I am so small, those people are great, I am nothing. And you see, it's not very different. You see? So, either way, the fear of having a spiritual ego tends to warp everything. Instead, recognize the value of each experience, knowing that it's the beginning of so much more. And in that way, an exaltation, an enthusiasm, a joy of having achieved or experienced something is acceptable and helpful even. So consciously try to dissolve this idea. If something is given to you or if you attain it by your effort, either way, it's never just by your effort. There's always a two-way experience. It's never just given. There's also a receptivity. So there's always a two-way. You turn with joy and gratitude to the Divine Mother and say thank you for this beautiful experience and help me to grow more. Keep the sense that this is the beginning of so much more that's waiting for you. And from that, build the faith that if I can get to this, I can get to the next and the next and the next unendingly. Please let go of this idea of great people, superior sadhakas or practitioners or advanced people. Let go of that because it's a perversion, it's a distortion. Everybody whom you may call today advanced from a certain perspective was right there where you are today at some point or other. If they have become whatever you might consider advanced, it's because of the action of the grace with their receptivity finally. So you are no different or they are no different from you. And the second, which is a more nuanced observation, someone you may think great may not actually be what you think. So it's best not to get into that line of thinking at all. If you see somebody having an experience or seeming to have an experience, draw as an inspiration. Yes, I also, because I feel it worthwhile, that means I have within me a potential to have it. and use that as your starting point. So coming back to the references for measurement, and you've pointed out growing peace, perception of beauty and joy in daily life, not identifying it with pain, maybe because right now that's something you're struggling with, but largely, as I said, the sense of pain itself would vanish. Struggle, yes, a little bit of pain indirectly, but no suffering, let's say. But clearer understanding of your nature, yes, but these are all secondary. The primary reference of any progress, growth, transformation of consciousness is the increasing sense of closeness with the divine presence in any aspect, in any way, in any part. In the part where you feel the divine presence more and more close, vivid, direct, intimate, and a strong aspiration for that to grow, that's your sense of, in that part, that's your sense of growth. Another way from the divine presence within, as the psychic influence itself, coming more and more to the front, dominating the direction of your thoughts, emotions, actions. And as that happens, automatically many values change. Things which were crude and coarse suddenly feel meaningless, and something more refined, more beautiful, more true becomes naturally for you, effortlessly, something you aspire for or crave for or need or miss. And these are again indications that something is shifting within you. But there is a third category of reference, which is the integration. That you are no more pieces pulling in 20 different directions. From 20 different directions, you are perhaps 3 or 4 directions. Or maybe overall you find your entire being is turning generally in a common direction more and more. This sense of integration around whatever the sense of the center is. It could be around the center of your aspiration, or even around a center in the mind of your turn of the spiritual life. But always it is backed by something deeper. But this sense of overall integration and common turning of your whole being to a common direction, that's again another measure. There are other secondary, tertiary measures which you can also use. Joy, increasing joy in everything you do. But to me, these are secondary and tertiary. The principal thing is what you must catch upon. Because you can see people who have a lot of joy all the time, and often that means that there is some, deeper influence of the presence in any case, but there's no conscious, active turn to the divine or the spiritual life at all. It could be just a vital joy supported by some presence, and that's it. And pretty much throughout the life, there will be nothing more. So, secondary references are not so important. Use these rather as the reference. And as a consequence of the changes within you, notice that you are no more the same person. And so this would be one more reference. Look at what you were 10 years ago and what you are now. Look at what you were 5 years ago, what you are now. Look at what you were 1 year ago and now. 1 month ago and now. And when you see significant change, or even that you look back at that person and you say, I can't even recognize that. I'm so embarrassed to look at that. It's not me. That's a sign that you've changed so much. And that's a reference of growth. And sometimes certain things happen rapidly in a short time. And within a month you will say, I'm no more the same person. And sometimes certain things take longer, especially in the more material parts. But when they do happen, it's radical. And it affects all other layers, because the physical is kind of the integrating base for everything else. So I think these would be worthwhile references which you will find helpful. I'm just looking at the chat box. There's probably some comment. So Pushya is asking, I think this question is a little bit off topic, but does emotional pain caused by a loved one pass on to the next life karma regarding soulmates and their destiny together? It's a bit tricky to respond to that, because this idea of soulmate is not quite what we think it is. There are in fact relationships which span across lives that we build. We may entirely forget during the physical birth and then remember when we leave the body. For example, that also happens. But the common idea of soulmate has to do with something which is much more emotional and limited to this life. It can be very deep, intense, emotional, or otherwise, but may have no value in terms of longer life references. So I would suggest that most cases, at least, the question being asked does not apply, and the pain caused by emotions will not pass on into the next life. There will be things, though, which are called, which are very extreme, where the soul's growth potential was hurt, damaged in some way. And those tendencies, particularly because they're close to the soul's formation, would tend to carry over in some form or other. And those are, of course, extreme. In a normal life, however painful emotionally you may have been distressed, these things would not happen. But it can happen in certain extreme, exceptional cases, as in case of suicide or murder or things of that nature, where there's a fundamental betrayal of the soul's aspiration and the soul's journey being cut short. So I think we'll go to the next question.
Another comment from Amelie. Adding my experience, when I practice the descent of peace, I feel I'm entering a slow tornado which slowly speeds up and I feel I'm lifting off. No out-of-body experience, just strong pull upwards.
Yes, I think this corresponds to what we discussed last time, and you might want to review the experience of the rising above in consciousness. Necessarily, when there is the descent of the peace, with it also will be an upward movement. It can happen first, followed by a descent, or there might be a descent which triggers an ascent. And what you describe sounds like that. The slow tornado is a way of describing, but there's a build-up of a certain intensity where you find yourself drawn up. Allow it. Allow yourself to be drawn up. Your consciousness is drawn into its own higher ranges. Stay in it. Habituate yourself to it. Learn to be in that state as long as you can, and then from that state more and more integrate with eyes open and in engagement with daily life. And you will find your poise of consciousness will shift eventually and be actually largely centered above the head. And you live from there. Right now we are living somewhere here from inside the head, some people more from the chest, but you will actually live as if from above the head or centered more from above the head. But allow this to happen. It's a useful thing. Do not confuse it with the OBE experience. You go to the next.
So we are getting to a next kind of topic about death. And one first question from Subodh. One important aspect was left out, that is cremation in wooden pyre versus electric or CNG. Nowadays, more and more Sanatanis are choosing electric CNG. Is it advisable to go for cremation after 24 hours of the death? Keeping the body in the mortuary is the workable option? I'm sure many of us would like to be more enlightened on this subject.
I cannot say too much from personal experience, but just applying the common sense from what we have understood from the mother's description and from other people's experiences, the actual physical process is somewhat secondary. The timing can make a difference. In the more electric and CNG types, it is much more radical and rapid, whereas the wood pyre would be somewhat slower, but end of the day it will have a similar effect finally. It's just a question of how much time. So yes, if there was a gap, it might be helpful, but there are practical reasons why we cannot maintain a gap. And if you think of putting a body in a mortuary, I personally don't find it the best environment for the body to be kept. So if there was a way you could keep the body in the same space with some kind of cooling mechanism, that would have been good. But in the absence of that, putting the body in a space which is horrible in terms of vibrations would not be too much better either. So might be that you delay as much as you can the cremation, but of course within 24 hours one cannot take beyond that. So I'm just putting a common sense approach to the whole question, and there's nothing much more I can say in terms of a practical solution. I personally don't think keeping in the mortuary is a good idea either. because the vibrations there are not so good. Go to the next question.
From Tutun. When the body is burnt, from the minute 42 from our last conversation, the entities with desires are dispersed in the environment and pass on to someone. Is this the reason why women were not allowed in cremation ground, but last few decades women do go, and even I went, but then maybe because now people aren't aware, etc., and not being aware make us more susceptible to these entities? Also, is it then a bad idea to meditate on the cremation ghats of Kashi?
Yes. Yes, I think so. I think largely what you're saying is in the right direction. Women generally tend to be more sensitive and so would sense these things, and if you sense, you pick up more easily. Men, and biologically, nature has designed men to be less sensitive. It's a discussion we have had on the masculine and feminine before. But as a result, also more resilient, especially at a physical level and emotional level. And therefore, even if they sense, it is not so overwhelming, and most likely they may not sense too much either. But generally, the idea is if you're sensitive to something, you tend to be susceptible to it. But there is also this recognition to protect women for this other reason, that you never know when a woman might be in a state of pregnancy. And at that point, you don't want to expose the woman to vibrations, energies, entities which are of low grade, which might then try to attach themselves. And it's the reason why a woman who's pregnant is held in an environment of a refined, high spiritual space. Beings which are of a contrary vibration cannot enter that zone because of what you have held. If by mistake you let the woman go into a space which is contrary, and at that point some being attaches itself, well, you have caught an incarnation of a lesser grade of being, when you would want actually to have as high a quality of consciousness as possible, for example. So this would be one more line of thinking. But the idea, of course, generally is anybody who's susceptible, who can be protected, who needs to be protected from exposure to disturbing or contrary vibrations, should be left out, even children. So only those who actually absolutely have to go would then be allowed to go. Now this is something which I would generalize now, not just to the space which is cremation, but also burial grounds. And it's to me always a very disturbing thing to see how in many of the European spaces you have the burial ground just next to the sacred part of the church. And it makes for a huge mixture of influences. In some cases, in the church itself, you have vibrations which are of a very low grade because of the mixture which has been allowed. So yes, one has to be careful, and not being aware makes us not as susceptible to the consequences, or at least to the awareness of the consequences. But you might still be susceptible to effects. Only you will not recognize it came from that, you would blame it on yourself or something else. So not being aware in itself is not a protection. Being dull and insensitive in a way does protect, because you don't register at all. But it doesn't mean the influence was not there. The influence was there, but it was not as strong. Or when it was there, you could not recognize the actual source of it. That's about it. Coming to the last part of the question, which is meditation in cremation ghats of Kashi. I would simply say observe your deeper sensitivity. When you see that or approach that, if you do not force yourself into a belief system, what's your natural turn of the deeper sensitive parts of you? Naturally, you kind of turn away. And then there is a kind of a curiosity of the mind which is, oh, what's that? Observe the two things. Notice their different parts. And then choose whichever is deeper, truer, higher, purer, more close to the soul and to the divine. There are traditions which actually deliberately go into those kinds of spaces. There are also traditions or paths which are very coarse in their approach, as for example what is called the left-hand path and such of the tantras. They're coarse and crude in their very basis. And in the path itself, it is defined only a person who has that particular temperament of a crude, coarse warrior type is suitable for that path. Not a refined, not a sensitive person. You're not suited for that path. So, for obvious reasons, because the path itself is crude and coarse. But simply observe your sensitivity. And if you want to meditate, feel the space where the deeper, higher presence is spontaneously felt. My own experience in visiting that space was, it's as if high above there was this very fine, beautiful presence, the sense of the sacred. Coming more to the gross, crude, physical layers, there was a coarseness, there was filth, there was crudity, and even ugliness. It did not feel at all like a place I would go to for a pilgrimage on this layer, physical. In the higher part, in the same space, there was almost like a portal, an opening to something very beautiful, almost as if a light streaming through. But it could not come to the material because of all this darkness here. So if somebody goes on this level, you would not want to go back. If you touch something of that, you would say, this is special. But then you can't, so to say, conflate the two things unless you recognize that what is on the lower level is actually a fallen condition of humanity. And even spiritually, it's a fallen condition. Although there are so many wonderful people who go with a lot of devotion, largely what is held on the physical level is very crude and coarse. But that's limited to my experience. I will not generalize from that. We go to the next question.
After a person passes away, does it fall on those around the person to disperse the other parts for him, for her? Can the person take care of all the parts of the being by the time he or she dies?
We can take the next question also together.
Yes. From Sandhya. What happens to the mental and vital bodies once the psychic being leaves the body? Do they dissolve the mental, vital into the vital worlds, or maintain their individual identity for some time?
Yes, so the first question is from V Truth. What happens to the things which break off, and can the person not take them? And Sandhya's question similarly, what happens to these parts when the psychic being leaves the body? Actually, a lot depends on each case and the choice of the psychic being. First, recognize that these parts break off because they were never integrated. The part of the consciousness which is integrated with the psychic being will tend to be, at least in essence, gathered in the psychic being. And I'll put it another way. From the psychic being's perspective, what is there that's worth taking from this personality? Think of it in these terms. If you actually experienced yourself now freed from this personality as you have it, what is it that you would want to carry with you from this? And I don't mean in terms of specific informational capacities, but the overall sense of the personality and its tendencies. What would you feel worthwhile carrying? Considering that you can have anything and everything and build anything and everything in your full freedom. And that's where you recognize there is very little for most people. There is very little that is worth carrying. Quite a bit you would want to discard, which is the case which often happens when people grow old. If they grow old enough, you see so many coarser layers falling off, literally. And that's when you get an idea of all those tendencies that dominated the bulk of their life now suddenly weaken and begin to dissolve. You've reached your 80s, you've reached your 90s. Often you'll find these people, they become almost like children. And there is this process of shedding which is already taking place. dissolution of the coarser parts. And then what remains often before they withdraw can be very close to the psychic, and those elements would certainly be worth carrying. But think about it in these terms. What would you find worthwhile? Not just from a worldly point of view, but in terms of content, because you can have anything you want. What would you really want to carry? And in most cases, you'll find all your coarser, cruder tendencies, habits, instincts, impulses you want to get free of. And so those are the things which fall away. Why did they stay? Well, because we attached ourselves to them, or we didn't bother to free ourselves from them. And that's what the yoga would do. Yoga would make you consciously get rid of them, or change them, transform, transmute, replace, etc. And if you have done the yoga in all these parts, there'll be much more worth taking, isn't it? So then really now look at it this way: the psychic being withdraws only what is useful, helpful, worth keeping in permanence. And the other coarser tendencies, including the substantiality of the coarser layers, fall. Just as the gross body cannot be absorbed because it's too crude as substance, well, it is shed. Similarly, on gradations of the vital, lower vital particularly, too coarse material. But something of the vital consciousness, the vital being, its more essential, refined and unified portion will be absorbed. And in most cases, for most people, something of the mental grade of the consciousness which has been sufficiently turned to the divine or unified with the psychic would be absorbed. So what is generally dropped is only the most coarse layers. Again, it's a choice of the vital to say, all right, while I already have these things, the material substance I don't want to keep, and I shed it. So that when I come back, I come with a very different personality. And at that point, what it has developed in terms of essential capacity in the vital mental grade of consciousness, which it has retained in a kind of a very fine grade of tendency, it infuses into new material of the mental and vital gradations, accumulating that grade, substance, form, like a magnetic field around, and then it plugs into the gross physical. In which case, it can be a very different personality from the previous. Or, if while leaving it says, oh, these I'm going to keep, and it keeps more of the prior personality, when it reincarnates, it will carry much more of the tendencies of the previous. Or it may draw back some tendencies of a life lived 5-6 lives ago, but which is now relevant for this. What often can happen also, and this relates to the earlier question of Tutun also, we see, for example, the biology as it grows, the mind is not yet ready. The brain is not yet fully formed to have an expressive mind in most cases. So the mind has to, so to say, stay hovering around before it can infuse into the brain. But something similar with the vital. And it's around the age of 2.5 to 3 that the form of the vital can be more actively expressed in the biology. And I have heard this recounted by somebody, a psychiatrist who I respect very much, who saw to his daughter, he saw as if from the higher grade a vital body coming and joining and merging, and the personality suddenly shifted. Now, if it was, and it's possible, it was something of the psychic being, it could also be something in affinity from the vital worlds which joined. And sometimes if the person is vulnerable, it can be from these things hanging around that something attaches also. And I mentioned last time how sometimes within a family, a formation may hang around and build and attach itself to further generations. So these are things we don't want to encourage. We want those things to be dissolved, or so that you are free to be what you choose to be. But understand that there is a huge scope of variation possible. When those things are discarded, they generally fizzle out on their own, they break down. What happens is, in the domain of the vital and the mental, things which are of the same grade, same affinity tend to coalesce. So if you live on a crude level of consciousness, you will tend to shift to coarser worlds. But you may have moved on the part of you which was associated with the coarse anger, that fragment of the vital body may hang around in the coarser world of its equivalent vibration, or attached to somebody or something, need not be always, but just hang around and dissolve on its own. There's no reason for it to stay, because there's no focal point of reality around which it can stay. and so inevitably these things do break down. But they're common substance of the vital worlds, reused, recycled, so to say, just as physical substance is in a continuous churn of utility. So one need not worry too much about these things. We can go to the next set of questions, which are quite different.
We have some questions on out-of-body practices. So the first one from Revati. I'm occasionally probably becoming aware of my vital body. Sometimes I wake up in my vital body and I find myself exactly in the same place where I slept.
Yes, it's interesting. But this observation that you're aware of your vital body, I find that very important. And all those of you who have been working consciously on becoming aware of these layers within you, you will find things like this happening. And it's quite fascinating and a domain of exploration that opens up for you. But notice, I'm not sure what Revati meant by finding exactly in the same place where I slept, because maybe that's where you woke up, so to say. But if, one thing which could happen, if you have gone to some other place, when you wake up, you feel as if you were in the place where you normally sleep. Interesting. Then it's as if a part of you identified with that space and tried to wake up there, but suddenly finding, oh, my physical body is not here, it gets pulled to the other place. And this is a common experience we have when we travel. You end up feeling distinctly you are in your own home, but at the moment when you wake up, you suddenly realize, yes, but although I'm in my home, my body is not here, and there's this shift which takes place. It's something interesting to observe. But just observe these things and they will lead you to interesting experiences, and with it, control and insight. Next.
From Marine. The only time I managed to travel in a higher plane, it was following a vibration received like a download, but did not have to go through the astral world. Is there a way to replicate this?
Yes, I'm assuming Marine is already having out-of-body experiences. So the question now would be, how do you get to a different grade directly? And a lot of this would have to do with the becoming conscious of that equivalent grade within you, and then being able to concentrate on that layer, and then as if open on that layer. So this higher grade came, you described as following a vibration received like a download. There was a descent of a higher grade of substance. As a result, you had familiarity of that grade of substance and the world corresponding. Once that substance within you, so to say, faded out, you had no more that access. Now there are two things you could do. Invoke the same descent. Consciously train yourself for that substance to become more and more infused in you, so that now it is a part of you. And with it now a capacity to open, to perceive, to sense on that level begins to grow. Or when you want to go out of the body, you recall what it felt like. And by recalling, it's as if a fine grade of your consciousness, so to say, touches that grade of substance. Or it's even possible in an out-of-body state that you find a way to shift. And depending on what you find, you use references, sometimes opening of doors and or light and things like that. But the point is, in your consciousness, you must as if tune into that. And the familiarity with that is your link, is your reference to shift levels also. But if you like, we can keep this question also to be asked to Geminus when we have the interaction with him, which will be soon. We can go to the next question.
From Good Vibes, for when you have out of body, with a body that is low, an etheric body, a body close to the physical, is it possible to go out for several hours?
Yes, and simply I would answer, why not? The question really is about going on a level which is very close to the physical. And can you stay out several hours? Normally, in the tradition, in the occult systems, they don't encourage that you go out for too long for two reasons. It is risky for you because you might be exposed to harm, which at that level of density, any harm to your subtle body would reflect on your physical body. but also that when your coarser grades are away from the gross physical, it goes into a cataleptic trance. And it's not good for the body to stay too long, because it's not getting its usual kind of, let's say, rest or energy. You might come back and the body itself might feel very tired. So these are questions really one of your temperament and then your skill and practice. There are people who have, so to say, built up the capacity to stay for long durations at a level very close to the physical. And well, it's a capacity built up. It's like you would do with an exercise that you push the boundary of capacity. But that's about it. There's no other reason why other than this. We go to the next.
From Caroline. I have heard it said that when you have the dream of falling from a great height and you wake up before you land, is actually you're coming back into your body from an out-of-body experience. This happened to me as a teenager.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So it need not always be an out-of-body experience. Sometimes it happens that in sleep state, our subtle body separates slightly from the gross physical. It may not be that you're conscious in an out-of-body state, but you are out of the body. In that sense, every night we have an out-of-body experience, but we're not in a conscious out-of-body. So you will find Geminus never refers to out-of-body experience. He refers to conscious out-of-body experience, COBE, not just OBE. And it's an important distinction, because in that sense we are all having out-of-body experiences, so to say, every night. But you may not be too far, or a part of you may be as if wandering, another part only slightly separated. And the movement of return, especially when it happens because of some sudden external trigger, you have the subtle body rapidly joining, falling down. So even if you are far away, you are first pulled and then there's this settling in. During that period, the sense of the falling sensation at a grade which is very close to the physical, and a higher grade you will not feel that. But in a grade which is close to the physical, you have the sense of the falling sensation, because that grade has materiality. So it experiences the sense of inertia, the momentum. And so in that grade, when you are coming back, you often have this sensation of falling, which may translate into the dream as a image of falling from the top of a building or whatever it is. And of course you never hit the physical ground. In that state you come into your body, you wake up. So I think I'm just taking this point of Caroline's observation to elaborate and make some fine distinctions. It doesn't mean you are out of body necessarily. It doesn't mean that every time you return you'll have the falling sensation. That will happen when you are on a coarser grade outside, while a finer grade may have gone elsewhere in dream state, wandering in much freer ranges. But this coarser grade is falling is what will trigger this kind of sensation. We can go to Jason's questions.
So he's writing, I have come across astral travel about 9 months ago, and I have been attempting it on occasion. I have tried a few techniques, including the rope, displaced awareness, watching myself sleep, with not a huge level of success. The first part, I have also attempted meditating on astral. I tried meditating, and on 2 occasions I got to what I feel was a deeper level of meditation about astral traveling, and could feel an intense presence on my skull. I tried to stay as focused for as long as I could, but maybe 10 minutes later, I had to stop it as the pressure was too intense to overcome. In the past, when I have felt this type of pressure, it has always preceded a fainting episode, where I may pass out briefly if I don't sit down. Once I sit down, it usually eases off within a minute or 2. On another separate occasion, while meditating on the descending of peace, I again felt this intense pressure and was not able to go beyond it. When I broke the session, I tried to stand up and I was unable to, and I ended up crawling to my bed that night. It may have been an hour later before the pressure sensation returned to my normal state, and I was able to go to sleep. What are your thoughts on this, please? Is this some kind of barrier I'm encountering? And I think the second part will answer after.
Maybe we just read it anyway. We'll answer both together then.
Yeah. On the second question, I recently had one lucid dream, and I was completely aware I was dreaming. Normally, I do not remember any of my dreams when I wake up. In this dream, I was with my partner, and we were about 5 kilometers from my childhood home. I stopped the car to pick up something from a local business, and when I came out, my partner and the car were gone. I started to walk to my childhood home, and when I got there, I was suddenly standing outside my current home. I entered and called my partner's name. I could hear a faint answer upstairs. When I went up, she was not there. I again called, and the sound came from downstairs, but again she was not there. This repeated a few times. There was no other sound and no one around. No birds or our rabbits were to be seen or heard. I remained in this confused state, where is everyone, for a few moments. But then the dream felt uncomfortable, and in my dream, I decided to turn over my physical body. And a moment later, I woke up, but I could remember all these details. Was I in some other vital level where no one existed except me?
It's interesting. So regarding the second question, which is about the lucid dream, if it is a lucid dream, then it's something which is a creation of your own consciousness. And so the sense of nobody being there could even be a reflection of your state of consciousness at that point in that layer in which the dream was taking place. But it's a construction. It's not an experience of the world itself. Only the grade in which you were having the lucid dream would be a reflection of the grade of consciousness of that world. But the forms you're seeing, you will see Mark describes this. It's literally like a projection in your personal bubble of the sceneries and images, but of the grade at the level in which you are during the time of the lucid dream. So then it need not correspond with physical reality or even the realities of those gradations of worlds too much, because it's your own consciousness building up. But it can build a rich detail of all kinds, even down to meticulously fine details, instantaneously, just like that. And it's Mark points to this in his book as the most extraordinary evidence of the power of your mind to be able to create a reality just like that in a single moment with full richness of details. But it's a reflection of your state, and therefore whatever you experienced might have at best a symbolic character that you saw no one else, because that was the state in your consciousness. It represented either a state or a tendency or a fear relevant at that moment. But the first part is the question where you're speaking of meditating on the astral, and you were able to go to deeper levels of meditation about astral traveling, and you could feel intense pressure on the head, and which you associate with a fainting spell, etc. And then you relate it to the descent of peace practice. So here is a point which I want to highlight. Normally, I would never have mixed the two things. I would have kept the descent of the peace meditation purely as a spiritual practice with a spiritual goal. That is, you receive a higher grade of consciousness into your mind, vital, physical, all the way down. And infusing that substance into you, awaken the substance, make it more conscious, increasingly receive through that descent a finer grade of what I will call intuitive influence, by which as it fills your mind, there will be an intuitivization and the illumination of the mind consciousness, similar from there into the vital and into the physical, and so on. I would have kept it purely for that. Incidentally to that, there would be also the more distinct formation of your subtle body and becoming aware of it, becoming aware in it, and being able to exercise that distinction, to be able to integrate across these layers, etc. If we kept just to this, we would never have mentioned the out-of-body experience. For some of you, just having this might have given you the capacity for an out-of-body experience, but you may never have bothered with it, or you might have had spontaneously something or not, it doesn't matter. But since in this topic, for the last few sessions, we have also been referring to the guided meditation for descent of peace as a means for building the capacity for out-of-body experience, it kinds of takes that primary focus into this other direction with a certain priority. And this is what I see in the Jason's question itself, because both these things are now linked. The purpose of the meditation, you need not concentrate on the astral if the goal is to receive the higher grade of consciousness as a descent. But if you are able to consciously shift into the subtle body, even in the subtle physical at least, where you feel this swollen form around you, the reception of that higher grade would be much more easy, much more direct, because it takes place directly in that grade of your subtle body. So in that state, the pressure also would be enormously greater felt when it is felt. But recall the discussion last time, the pressure need not be uncomfortable. It only means there's a resisting layer. Relax the part where you feel pressure, open, widen and receive. Immediately the pressure dissolves or the pain dissolves. The pressure itself may be more like a pleasant, even intense but pleasant pressure, and along with it a descent that you can consciously then direct all the way down, layer by layer, all through to the feet. And I would recommend you do that. Do not think of it as something negative. Do not associate it with a fainting episode. You don't need to faint at all. Rather, the descent would shift your awareness intensely in the subtle awareness, in the subtle grade of the body. And that's a good thing. So if in the past you had a fainting episode, it was only because of that, perhaps there was a slight separation, and you tried to get up too soon before the full integration took place. So that brings it to the second part of that question, where in the descent of peace, you tried to stand up and you had to struggle, and you had to crawl to bed that night, simply because you did not allow enough time for the reintegration. Especially after a strong descent where you feel your subtle body fully, distinctly swollen, large, you have to allow slow integration with the physical, literally wait with eyes open, allow sensations in the feet, in the legs, in the hands, in the arms to reasonably return or fully return even, but without losing that as much as possible. And then obviously for a while you will stay. Even if you get up and walk, you will stay conscious, retain this double awareness. You don't want to lose that. You don't want to snap out. You will retain that double awareness. Having done this a few times, the integration will happen within a few days. So much so that you won't have this sense of being unable to stand up or struggling to crawl back to bed, etc. And the pressure sensation returning to normal, what you call pressure sensation is this swollen dense layer around you. It does not need to return to normal, which is a loss of it. You can also retain it or let it fade out and then recover it consciously at will whenever you choose to. But now as you get used to that, as that becomes more and more normal, there will even come a point where in your daily life, in a normal state, that will be your normal. You'll be aware of this denser layer along with your physical body, and you'll be able to live from a state which is substantially in the inner and from there acting in and through the physical. And everything changes. Everything without exception is much more sensitive, plastic, free, receptive, open, and especially from a spiritual and a psychic point of view, the connection, the descent, the closeness of the inner influence, all these are much more vivid, intense and complete, more direct. So it's worth it. There is no barrier, it's just the preconception which is preventing you from recognizing that this state is worth it and allowing a little bit of the integration to take place before you push yourself to move around fully in the gross physical body. Play with it, trust that it is a worthwhile experience and there's an integration taking place, and I think everything will be fine. I think we will take Trinetra's question.
I have a bit of a personal question. Is it possible to meet and talk to the mother while we have come out of our body? I ask this because I have heard talks where a speaker said that back in the days, Mother and Sri Aurobindo were visible in their samadhi compound and almost anyone can see them. But then they both decided to plunge into the inconscient to awaken and transform it. Therefore, I wonder if the mother in her vital body and subtle physical can be seen. Also, there is the fear of rejection angle. I tend to fear that if I go to find mother, she might reject to see me as I'm unworthy and not so pure, and that will cause me extreme grief. I also wonder if the extreme radiance from the mother's vital body might zap me into my physical body, back into my physical body. If I wish to find mother, do I concentrate on her directly or do I concentrate on Sri Aurobindo Ashram and go there and find her? If it isn't too much, can you please share the experience of yourself or anyone you know in recent times who met mother during exteriorization to the extent that you feel comfortable?
Yes, I think a part of this question we will add to the list of questions for Geminus, and I have quite a long list already which we have gathered over all these sessions, and I'm sure he will have some interesting experiences to share also. But first of all, to your question, yes, it is possible to meet and speak with the mother and with Sri Aurobindo when you're in an out-of-body state, if you go to them or if you call them. But this story about being visible around the samadhi compound, etc., and then them going into inconscient, I think there's a mixture there. I would not take that story literally. It doesn't seem quite right. It's not as if they went into inconscient and suddenly stopped being there. No, it's not at all like that. The phase of the inconscient is when in the 1930s, when the transforming process top-down was taken all the way through the vital and then into the physical, and that was just a stage of the sadhana. But the mother herself has said that Sri Aurobindo is living in his subtle physical body at the level closest to the earth physical zone. He has chosen to take his stance there, and it is also where the mother has settled herself. And I remember this was narrated to me by Suresh Hindocha, and he showed me the letter he had written to the mother. In a dream state, he had an out-of-body experience of some kind, and he found himself near the mother, meeting her, but she was all bluish in her light. And when he narrated it to the mother the next day, she said, yes, of course, in the subtle physical there's the bluish tinge. And this is often the case for many people who have had that kind of close experience, and it is still felt. I know of several people who have felt, seen. For me, the seeing is never so important, because the form is how we want to fit it into our little box of expectation. The feeling of the presence is always more complete as an experience, especially when you're in the physical body. So I've met several people who have had that kind of experience, some of them even while upstairs. One particular lady, it was, I can name her now, Swarnadi, who used to work upstairs. Once she called me and said that she wanted to share certain experiences, and I think I was able to record it on cassette tape. Both before she came, I've narrated her experience. She was swinging the crib of her child while it was in Bengal, somewhere in West Bengal, and she would go into meditation, and on several occasions Sri Aurobindo took her out of the body. And on one occasion, he took her out, brought her to some place, made her bow down before somebody, a very beautiful lady, and said, hereafter she'll be in charge of your sadhana. And many years later, when she came to Pondicherry, she went to the ashram archives, and she recognized, oh, this is the building, this is where I had been brought. And it so happened that was the time when the mother was living there in that building. So Sri Aurobindo literally did a handover of her sadhana to the mother in that out-of-body state. But she was subsequently kept by the mother as one of her, I don't think we can use the word attendant, but she was working upstairs in the mother's salon and Sri Aurobindo's rooms for most of her life subsequently. And she narrated how, she said, even now, she said, sometimes when I'm sitting very quietly, I can feel them passing by. So there was no physical visual perception, but obviously it was the presence in the subtle physical form. But also recognize they've chosen that station because it's the closest to the physical, because of the action of the supramental force on the physical world. That is the work being done. But it does not mean they're bound to that space or that even subtle physical form. In consciousness terms, they're everywhere. So once you understand this, all your other fears, I would ask you to consciously dissolve, get free of these things. First, this fear of rejection is not the relationship you have with the Divine Mother. If the Divine Mother rejected you, you would not exist, literally. Isn't it? Because everything that exists in the universe is a part of her consciousness. That's why she is Divine Mother, including the Asuras. So, and the worst thing you can conceive of or you can recognize in creation, well, that's also part of her consciousness, her child, so to say. So you have nothing at all to fear about these things. And her values have nothing to do with moral or other references. These are all wrong ideas coming from some of the ascetic spiritual and philosophical traditions. And that's why I'm pointing to these so poignantly, that you can recognize their origin and then consciously dissolve and let them go. Your relationship with the Divine Mother is from her side first, total self-giving in love. You could not be otherwise. And it is she who has nurtured you through all these millions of years of your evolution. She has been carrying you and protecting you, nudging you, awakening within you all these tendencies and aspirations until you have come to where you are. And do you think at this point she'll say, you are not good enough? No. She is desperate for you to grow and wake up, isn't it? She'll say, at last, my child, you've come. At last, you've woken up. That would be her response, isn't it? So, consciously set aside all those wrong ideas. Let go of all the distortions which come from these ascetic traditions. Her relationship to you, as I said, is one of entire love. The question now is, what is your relationship? If she can give you with herself with unconditional love, will you say, oh, I fear? Or will you at least begin to make that effort to open yourself with unconditional love, gratitude, aspiration, joy? That should be your true relationship. That is your psychic being's true relationship. All these confusions are in your mind and vital parts. So, purity and worthiness have no reference here. It's only one, the only reference is of openness and joyous self-giving. That's all that matters. So, dissolve all that. She is waiting for you. Put it this way. She is waiting for you. And Mother's recommendation was, she said, people come to meet. She was speaking of physically. They would come, they would put this layer of pretense, as if they are little angels, and come to her, put up their best front, hiding their other parts. And of course, she was always gracious. But she said it's much better if you come as you are, bared as a child. Because then she can reach those other parts and work upon them, which is the whole point of the meeting, isn't it? You're not going there to impress her. You're going there so that she can work on you. For that, you open yourself bare. Everything. Positive, negative, partial, full, whatever layers as they are. All the layers that you can be aware of, just simply open and say, fill me with your light, with your love, with your peace, with your joy. Change me, transform me. It's not your responsibility to make that change. And whatever you are in terms of worthiness or purity, etc., is just a stage of your current development. And we all begin with that. If we didn't begin somewhere, we would never be where we are today. So where we began, where we are today has no meaning. Which direction we are going towards is the only thing that matters. Direction, not how far you are on the path. If you're off direction but advanced on the path, what's the point? If you're in the right direction, wherever you're on the path is irrelevant, because the pace of growth can be accelerated by her intervention in you rapidly. Much more rapidly than anything you could imagine, because you're already in the right direction and open. So keep this as your priority. And if you meet, let's say you want to meet, and the question is about meeting her in an out-of-body state, her body will not zap you into your physical body. It will be such a beautiful experience that, well, you will tell us. And the question is, if you want to find the mother, do you concentrate on her directly or on the ashram, or go there, find her? So, first, without an out-of-body experience, think of it this way. She is already present where you are, because she is everywhere in the cosmos equally, as Divine Mother. But which part of you is most open and receptive to her, become aware there. And generally that's a deeper part within. It could be closer to where you feel the psychic influence, or it can be a part of your mind. It can be the part where you feel your aspiration. Just observe. Feel your closeness with her. Immerse yourself in that closeness. There you have already met her. You are fixating on a perception and an interaction in form. I am pointing out to you that if you do not attach to form, you can meet her as easily where you are right now, with eyes open or closed or out of body, irrelevant. We have been programmed to think in terms of body forms. That's why, though I mentioned that example of the subtle physical form, which Swarnadi also felt and others have seen in that physical space, they are not bound to that. That's only a focal point of the consciousness, which is large, which is infinite. So they are as much present in you, and to them you are in them, in their consciousness. So first make this connection more complete. Then in an out-of-body state you can say, I want to have that form also, that contact with that form on a subtle physical level. Yes, then you can go there. Yes, one can go to the subtle physical ashram and experience things there. And I think we will have a useful description of that from Geminis when we meet with him, which will be in after I will have a pause of a few weeks when I'll be out of station, but the first session after that it will be with him. So yes, there have been people, yes, we have had experiences, but again there is another way which is not necessarily out of body experience, but in dream state, in a lucid type of dream, but which takes place on a grade which is much higher, and you may or may not recall generally because the gap is too great. So what you do is you put an intention to meet her and put an intention to recall. This is very important. And you go to sleep in that state of immergence in the presence, in the closeness with her. You will have an experience, and even if you don't recall, over a few days at least, the capacity to recall will build. I've shared an experience earlier of how I had an experience of an interaction with her, but which was lost and was available only as a link at one grade of the memory in the layers of consciousness. I've mentioned that. And it took me a while to kind of catch that and recall the full memory. But yes, these things are need to be worked upon and developed. I want to read from the chat box where someone has shared a very interesting experience which is fully in line with your question. So this is from Zen Rain is saying, before I went to sleep again, I called the mother and asked for her to guide me in an out-of-body experience. Shortly after closing my eyes, I saw a bright light and found myself out of my body. I could feel and see her with me as I am wandering around my home. She instructed me along the way to look at my hands and feel the silver cord behind my head. It was a beautiful experience. I was shocked by how simple it was. Not just asking for protection, but asking for guidance and instruction from the mother. Wanted to share this. And so several people have asked specifics, and her reply is simply, no, I simply ask for guidance and then let go. Sounds very simple. And also when I wake up after the alarm, so asking for the guidance and letting go. bright bluish light, and that's about it. So yes, it can actually be as simple as this, and I thank Zen Rain for sharing this. I hope this will inspire all of you by the ease of the whole thing. And the question really is of being able to recall in most cases. And most people tend to forget even though they have had some very beautiful experiences. So today we don't have much time for the text that I wanted to have of the mother. We'll just complete with 2 more observations, 1 comment and one question.
We have one more question from Nikhil. One day I was seeing a photo of Sri Aurobindo. He was standing on the stairs of his earlier home in Pondicherry. Suddenly I felt something out of me was coming to enter into him. Was it my subtle body which was coming out to enter into him?
Yes. You see, the question is one of 2 different forms, and then something has to go from one form to another. But if you recognize he is already within you, his presence, then the part in you that's waking up and giving itself and merging into his experience is what you experienced. Except it got objectified in the way in the dream because you were interpreting it in terms of forms. So this goes back to what I described earlier to Trinetra's question about actually experiencing this merging with the presence of the Divine Mother right here within you, because she is there equally within you, and it's this merging which is your key. Work on this first. The external form and the experiences in separated form is secondary. This is your sadhana, really, literally. This is the thing which will give you what you're looking for. So in Nikhil's experience, this was what took place. The part of which was most close to Sri Aurobindo in love and affection, in oneness, in the psychic aspiration, joined. But because it was objectivized, there was the sense as if it's going out. But actually nothing went out. Or you can use a different vocabulary, it woke up and joined with his consciousness. And that's all. A very precious, very valuable experience. But this is what you should have every day when you sit in concentration, in meditation. So the last part is a message from Geminus. Maybe you can read that.
Yes. He's writing, please post this on Evenings with Sraddhalu as a suggestion to watch from Geminus. Thank you. The video presentation is true and accurate and very moving and motivating for all newcomers. The title is Elysium Unveiled, a visual journey through life eternal.
Okay.
Maybe we should put it on the...
Yes, I've already put it as a link in the description box. In fact, just to tell you, there are several things I've put. The first is this video which is recommended by Geminus. It is created by Jürgen, and it's a promotional for his book which is called Elysium Unveiled, a visual journey through life eternal. Now there was a question several weeks ago in the chat box when someone had asked, have you seen the videos of Jürgen? And at that time I had not. So I didn't have much to say and I didn't have the time. But after Geminus's recommendation, I had a look at his things much more. Not yet enough, but just superficially. So Jürgen is an artist. So creating graphic arts, and therefore having had many out-of-body experiences and some profound spiritual experience which changed his life. He has been documenting the out-of-body experiences in his first book. And after his profound spiritual experience, many things have changed. And he's not the same person. He had an experience of immersion in the self, and the sense of that as a backdrop has never left him subsequently. So I would give very high spiritual value to his experiences subsequently. But he has not the same kind of intuitive insight by which he is able to recognize things for what they are. It still takes him time to recognize what the thing is without prior or other knowledge. So certain things he understands in a speculative way, but what he describes is accurate. And being a graphic artist, he has used artificial intelligence as a way to create these videos and paintings. And this is actually a promotional for his book where he has got some 200 pictures paintings in this way, but created with artificial intelligence, not by his hand. But putting that together in this video is what Geminus recommended for everybody to see. And Geminus's purpose was to use it as a motivation for all who are interested in the out-of-body experience. But looking at his website, I also found other videos which he has created which are presented as a virtual reality. Now, virtual reality is a whole new field which some of you might like to explore. Although it's on the YouTube, I've put the second link, which is called Astral Dreams. Again, it's a video created through artificial intelligence. But the advantage of virtual reality is you could actually put it like goggles, turn your head around, and as you move your head, you see everything around you in a 360-degree visual. On YouTube, you will find there are 4 controls: up, down, left, right. So by clicking on those arrows, you can as if navigate as if you were looking around. But those of you who have a virtual reality headset, you can use that as a way of literally immersing yourself. And there are several videos which Jürgen has created. This is just one of them which I happened to see. I have also posted Mark's conference which took place in Pondicherry on 28th of January this year, and I had been promising for that to be put up. Part 1 was put up in the week before, last week, and part 2 appeared this week. And for those of you who are interested, do look at that, because there he speaks of many things, he answers many questions, and he also speaks of what he considers the easiest way, which is using that method of waking up in the morning when your glue is the thinnest, and using that as your point of entry for the out-of-body experience. There is a comment from Light where she says, I feel Mark's presentation was too simplistic, personal and overgeneralized. Well, that's not fair to say. Remember, Mark would he does 10-day programs. So here was a 1-day program with starting from zero, presenting to people who have no idea of what he is going to be talking about. So necessarily things will be reduced. But when you look at his book, you will get a greater sense of the scope of his own experiences as well as what he has to share. So these 2 links are also put in the download, but you can see it on the website directly on the YouTube channel. I have also put 2 more links of the mother's text, but I think I will remove those now. I have removed them already. So that will be for another time. For today, I want to complete with this observation and prepare us for the next one. So, Geminus wanted all of us to have a glimpse of this for a reason, as a kind of a inspiration, as a motivation to want to have an out-of-body experience. But, and this is the part where I want to put a caveat. It's a warning, it's a fine point, maybe, but important point to keep in mind. In the out-of-body experience, it's not merely the visual. In the out-of-body experience, it is the state in which you are and the way you perceive, which is so fundamentally different that the visual itself is of a different kind. So the problem of Jürgen's video is it's a reduction from the out-of-body experience to just the visual content of it. And when you do that, you've missed the point of the out-of-body experience. You could have gone to a movie and watched a movie. It won't be the same as an out-of-body experience. When you're out of the body, for example, you would find yourself in a consciousness which is much wider, freer, larger. And your senses are much closer to their true way of knowing, which is in an identity. Again, depending on gradations, but still, let's look at a more general and perhaps a higher grade of experience. You look at a flower and it's not the rigid physical form, but the scintillating colors and the constant dynamic flow of life force in the form, through the form itself being made of living substance. But you observing it while you're objective, also have a subjective content, because there's a part of your consciousness which identifies with it and experiences it as if from inside out. Not totally, but partially. Because the moment you move away from the gross physical worlds, the higher you go, the more direct the identity. But already even at layers close enough to the physical, one begins to experience the sense of an underlying identity. So as you watch that, there is a level of fascination and a wonder, and I think Mark describes this. You could keep on staring at the flower for one full hour and not get bored, because there is a newness which is revealed at each moment. And this can never be captured by the visual alone. So while you will enjoy Jürgen's visual and maybe even his virtual reality, recognize that it has not the question of the visual, but the way we experience the state in which you are and the way you relate it all. And especially in the higher ranges, the underlying sense of infinity and eternity which is constantly present. And again, depending on your own evolution and your own familiarity with that experience, it can become more or less intense, more or less deep, and according to the ranges, more or less complete. And it is these things which would make the out-of-body experience so much more worthwhile. So still, the visual journey can be motivation, and even Jürgen suggests, for those who can do it with the VR, that you do that before sleeping as a way of programming yourself to actually have that experience before you go to sleep. But finally, it all comes down to an aspiration. So with or without the support of the visual, the aspiration would be enough to get you there. Geminis has also sent a teaser. So let me now announce for the schedule for the next few sessions. Beginning next week, I will be out of station, and we will skip 4 of the live sessions. And so the next session will be on the 27th of July. In between, each week on the Saturday evening at the same time, there will be an upload of certain other talks, some of which at least will be very interesting, I'm sure. But it will be a way of keeping the time and also keeping the momentum of our concentration on these days, on this day of the week at this time. So that will continue. We'll have 4 very interesting videos. But on 27th of July, very likely, Geminis will join us for this continuation of this topic. We will have many questions which have been pending, which I kept specially for him. So just as I had preserved certain questions for Mark, I've kept certain questions specifically for Geminis, because his vocabulary will also be aligned to the integral yoga, and his experiences also within this framework, which will be helpful for those who had questions. But in case anybody wants to ask anything more, do send the questions. We will compile them together. But Geminis wrote in his email, he said, I'm reading out, my July 27th is all clear for our sharing talk on evenings with Sraddhalu. I look very forward to that. Earlier I mentioned the silver lining. What is this? Which he will share with us. In the time that will have passed, if your listeners have still not managed a clear out-of-the-body exit with full conscious awareness, I will, during that talk, offer another very powerful technique, and one, I might add, that has never failed to produce the desired results for sincere aspirants. Never. So I would hope that before we have the interaction with him, many more of you will have had an out-of-body experience, even if you have it once, just as an experience. As I've said, it is so much worthwhile, and I hope Zen Rain's experience will also be inspiring for all of you, but many more perhaps by that time. And then perhaps you will have questions which will be more directly relevant of how you might want to proceed if you want to develop it further. So this is as regards Geminis and our next session. Yes, so Dolores makes this observation. Seeing the visual also puts some limitation on what to expect, and Mark said not to expect anything, so that you can have the true experience. Yes, that is one would want to approach it. But I think Geminis has a good reason to also suggest for us to view it. So why not just view it any case, without expecting that you'll have the exact same experience, but rather capture the sense of the quality of the visuals and see if, looking at it, something of you can touch something deeper behind. And I'm going to close with this observation. Most of you would remember the movie called Avatar, especially the part 1 when it came out the first time. And when you saw the movie and the movie ended, something within you said, but I want to continue to live in this world. And many people had to struggle with that. We didn't want to come back. And there was a reason for that. The reason was that the way it had been visualized was very similar to the subtle physical worlds. And so it's as if watching that reminded you of something deeper. And that memory was pulled forward. In the second movie that they created, the focus was much more on the drama and the visual effects of the storyline. And there was not the same quality of the beauty and the innocence which was present in the first one. So maybe not everyone had the same kind of feeling. But still, it is to point out the value of this, and this is perhaps why Geminis has suggested for us to view it. It has the effect of as if awakening a deeper memory, and that would be helpful. So I would suggest, as you watch the video of Jürgen's AI visuals, rather than looking at the visuals for what they are physically in the image, try rather to feel that which it evokes within you as a memory. And even as a grade of experience. For many of us, it will also recall states which you have or experiences which you have in a lucid dream state. Because of course one sees many such things in the lucid dream state also. But nevertheless, the intention would be to as if tune in to something forgotten which is now remembered, and then allow that to come forward much more directly. So this is where we are today. We have covered a lot of important questions, and the theme still is not complete. Next time we will have with Geminis a much more detailed interaction around the questions which are there. Subsequently, depending on what's required, we may do one more session with the mother's text which I had intended for today. It's very important, and I think you will all enjoy that, especially when we elaborate on certain nuances that she leaves as passing comments. So I think with this we can look back at this aspiration that we touched upon last time, and which Zen Rain has shared its effectivity with us. Simply, I think Zen Rain mentions that waking up with the alarm combined with this aspiration, asking for her help, for her guidance, and then letting go. And it's as simple as that. Before I went to sleep again, so after the alarm which woke at whatever 3 a.m. or whatever, before I went to sleep again, I called the mother and asked for her to guide me in my out-of-body experience, and then whatever follows. But put also the intention that you will remember. If nothing else, simply go into deep immersion in that part within you where already your aspiration is merged in the mother's presence, in the love that she fills into you, and which awakens within you the response of the gratitude and the love and the joyous self-giving in whatever way it happens. Sink into this, merge into this, immerse into this, and go to sleep with this, and then into that you may have an aspiration for her to give you the necessary out-of-body experience and for you to be able to recall. And that's it. And go to sleep with that. If nothing else, whether you have the memory or even whether you have the out-of-body experience, this would be spiritually fruitful every night. So if you combine it with the opportunistic method which has already been discussed, that would also give you the out-of-body experience with this added benefit. If nothing else, it will still give you the spiritual growth. So let's all stay in this aspiration and in this concentration for a while. Namaste.
Namaste, and thank you very much.